Any questions for the panel about anything they've said or about the whole topic? Okay.
I'm from a vendor, so my name is Michelle Balderson. Thank you very much, Mark, for mentioning my presentation several times. One of the things that I didn't hear anybody talk about was certification of supply chain of physical hardware. And that if I'm a hacker, if I'm going to go after advanced, persistent threats and very advanced threats, I'm going to do a targeted attack, and I'm going to do it through your supply chain. And so I'm wondering how any of you guys are looking at addressing supply chain risk. And then the other question I have is that if I'm going to be an advanced persistent threat, you guys talked about the abnormal, but my behavior patterns are going to look normal within your network. So how are you addressing normal behavior patterns?
So I can jump on the supply chain issue. We work at a utility. There's a couple things that, well, a number of things that are going on related to supply chain. First of all, there's more regulation coming from NERC. There's a new SIP standard coming out that has to deal with supply chain. I mean, one more standard yet. We saw the XKCD earlier, so it's on its way. It's going to solve all problems, right? Yeah, the supply chain issue is a hard one, and I think the solution really is a team approach. That in reality, I don't think there's anything we can do to solve the supply chain at Fortinet or Cisco or Emerson or any of the other vendors sort of thing. We could go out and try to make checklists, and we've tried to do that. I think we all do it. When a cloud vendor comes in, we've got the lists that we ask them the same questions, and we get on the phone with those vendors, and they're like, we've heard this from everybody that we sell to. You know, we're all asking them the same sorts of questions. I think we've got to get to a point where the supply chain itself and the people in it realize that we use the parts from Schweitzer Engineering, and they do a really good job with their supply chain. They've got a standard, and I think, as far as I know, they're one of the ones that I think sets the bar in terms of if you can geographically isolate who's friendly and foe sort of thing. But in all, I think we have to work together as a team. There's got to be some level of certification like what Schweitzer does that says, here's what we do for supply chain, here's the way that we do it. And then as market forces start to dictate, I think we end up starting to see the market move towards the ones that are doing a better job at supply chain. And specifically that deals with hardware in that respect, but software I think is a major issue as well. We've already seen breaches occur where remote access systems were embedded in the code of a certain remote access vendor, right? That software supply chain could be an issue. There are going to be adversaries for which you will not solve that problem. Nation states, if you name a certain Middle Eastern country with a very good security program, Israel, right? If they wanted to get into the supply chain, they can. And they've demonstrated that capability. If they're your adversary, if they're on one of the lists, you're going to have a major problem with supply chain. And I think the same would go for pretty much any of the nation state sort of adversaries that you look at. So I think together is where we actually solve that problem. I don't think the solution is in a bunch of check boxes or anything like that. I think it's when Fortinet does a great job dealing with their supply chain, I think the market forces start moving towards supply chain the same way that Apple has made security a point of interest in their products, right? When they started moving that way, people started buying it, and security started to become listed as one of the reasons. I'm seeing more and more of that with Microsoft as they're improving their platform, that more and more people are saying, yeah, I like Windows, I like the sandboxing technologies, I like those things that make it so, I mean, I don't have to run antivirus on the iPhone, right? It's not there because they've eliminated it with good architecture as well. I think some of those sorts of things start to help us solve the supply chain. I can't write code and get it installed on this. I can't install bad code. It blocks me from doing ineffective things. That's how you start solving the supply chain problems. Abnormal versus normal, the second part. Anyone else want to talk on supply chain?
Go ahead, you answer it.
So I guess for the abnormal versus normal and what you're looking at in a network, I think when you start looking at anomaly detection, it has good benefits in certain things. Digital twins, I think got mentioned earlier. When you're looking at what's the lifespan of a turbine, we use that sort of anomaly detection to start saying, how can I fine-tune my maintenance of this turbine so that I'm not going to take it offline too soon. I want to get that maintenance done just in time, right? That's the sort of thing where I think anomaly detection starts to come into play. I think when you start looking at what's normal, you start getting into that complex problem again, right? There are so many different things that are normal, and it might be because of one problem leading to another, that if you're starting to check for anomaly detection and those sorts of things in terms of human behavior, you're going to end up with a lot of false positives. We had a side discussion about that this morning. You're going to start having so many people investigating normal situations that appeared to be anomalous that it's going to be very costly. I mean, it's not undoable, but your budget's going to triple, quintuple, or more to be able to solve that problem. I think you have to start chaining those things together. You have to start thinking in terms of what people are doing in terms of behavior. So an adversary gets onto a box using some sort of exploit that might look like something, and then they initiate, say, an RDP connection. And then when that RDP connection, they do something abnormal. Those three sequences together, when you start analyzing them, might look different than what an engineer would do when troubleshooting a problem, or the dwell time on a specific box. I think that's where we're going to have to start getting to for normal versus abnormal.
Yeah, I'll comment on this as well. I think I agree with your comments. This is a kind of a very tough problem, the supply chain piece, and as well as the other second part with the normal versus abnormal behavior. In Shell's, we haven't solved that problem either, but I'll say what we are doing, like for our critical components that we use to build, an automation system, like our safety systems, we have a limited set of vendors that we use for that. And so that equipment tends to goes through certain certifications like TUV, and we are promoting, on the security side, we are involved in the ISA Secure program, and so we want to see the components that we buy also have a security certification. And so that's at least one step or one activity that we're doing there. Now we're going to be dependent upon our suppliers, to chase down their entire supply chain, to wherever they get the parts around the world. I don't think we have a program in place to make that a priority yet, but that's something we're talking about. How do we make sure that we're using suppliers that have a known and well-established process in their organization to make sure that their supply chain is valid. And in terms of the abnormal, normal behavior, we're kind of just starting a journey on implementing this anomaly, anomaly and breach detection software. And again, we're going to be dependent upon our suppliers to develop that, to have that technology, and we buy it and deploy it. Now, I suppose there'll need to be a partnership there. Maybe the suppliers don't know what normal is for a given plant, so maybe we have to collaborate to help them, help implement the tooling. So maybe that's something that's coming. I wouldn't say we're doing that yet either, but we are leveraging, what we internally call our cyber defense team, and integrating that kind of tooling to that team, because they have the skill sets that you were talking about, or somebody was talking about. The ability, all the skill sets, and it's an IT skill set, security skill set, and that doesn't exist in our asset integrity environment. So we have to leverage that. And so to clarify one thing earlier, we think that the leveraging asset integrity processes is where we need to manage cybersecurity. But just like everything else in a typical, complicated asset, there's all sorts of specialty niche skill sets required to manage that. IT is just another one. And so we got to bring IT skill sets to bear on managing cybersecurity, risks in our assets. But we want to leverage the processes that are already there. Yep.
I agree on both of the answers. I didn't want to repeat some of those ones, but I wanted to add that this is the same issue we are also facing The plants are becoming more independent. You know, the local knowledge is definitely limited to day-to-day operation, but then each and every machinery we depend on supplier. Supplier comes back and says, you know, we're going to deploy this as a black box to you guys. We will manage the whole thing and things like that. So now suddenly this item is becoming very critical to us. So what does that mean to us? You know, black box to us means, you know. So we are going through this similar kind of a phase where we are trying to understand and say, to have a continuous monitoring, or only when there's a problem and when our engineer calls you, that's the time you get in. So we are working on those kind of a parallel that say, hey, if it's a continuous monitoring, you have to only follow this particular type of connectivity that we are going to provide. If it's on demand, then what is the minimal you have to do, whether it's a remote access or is it a Skype call and you're sharing the PC. You know, so we are putting a different level, different kind of a scenario where the supply chain people can come in and help us resolving the problem. So we are facing the similar kind of thing from the supply chain too. So we are working on that. So just want to add that.
Okay. Just a couple more comments on that. Is from the supply chain side, that's obviously an interesting one. How do you know that the vendor that's coming in has the correct file? Is it really a valid file, or is it a corrupt file? In testing environments and those type of things, and validation of that will help you improve in that. For the activity looking normal, the broader view of the whole enterprise can at least begin to identify maybe it is somewhat normal, but maybe it's a little unusual, and then further investigation of that type of traffic. So just a couple other points.
Hi, how you doing? I'm Lee Riddle with Georgia Tech Research Institute. I come from a defense background, where we typically do security certification for 2 years on military systems before they get fielded. So I just wanted to give you that background before I ask my question. So it seems like at this point in time, there's a number of increased complex adversaries like foreign nations developing cyber attack teams, which are seeking high impact attacks, and it seems like that's just throughout time. We're getting more and more of that with Iran and Russia, but it seems like it's even going to get more complex and more, there's going to be more targeted impact attacks. So I guess my question is, what the government typically does is they have one network where or one database where they're recording and doing all the event logging themselves for all the attacks that they're happening, potentially across the whole DoD. And across the whole USG, the United States government. But I see that, you know, as IoT is becoming more embedded into the latest, you know, into the oil and gas industry and the power industries, that it's becoming, you know, those systems are going to become more and more vulnerable over time. And I guess my question is, do you guys see yourselves working together and collaborating more as companies and not just internally? And I don't just mean by standards bodies, but actually doing event logging across companies, you know, before, you know, there may be some more government oversight that actually comes into play because of the fact that these nations are going to be targeting you.
Yeah, yeah, so my perspective on this, you know, these advanced, you know, threats that could lead to some of this high impact stuff. There's a spectrum of in a given asset, there's a spectrum of you know, hazard scenarios that have a range of possible impact or consequence impact severities, and so at the highest level, we're trying to prevent major accident incidents, you know, major accident hazards that would lead to, you know, release of energy, release of you know, hydrocarbons or whatever, and you know, those get the most attention from our asset integrity point of view. And so there is some things happening in the industry, you know, in the safety regime. There's, you know, PHAs, hazards, HAZOPs, all that goes on. And we actually got an inquiry from the Coast Guard in our deep water for our Gulf of Mexico operations. And they're asking us, are you considering cybersecurity in your PHA process, your process hazards analysis process? Well, there is some ideas being out there around whenever you're going through your process hazard analysis and you're looking at initiating events for a given hazard scenario, and you're going through the process of selecting your control barriers and your recovery barriers, especially the control barriers, there needs to be recognition that a lot of those control barriers these days are cyber vulnerable, meaning that they are running on microprocessors and they're running software and likely connected to a network. And an example of that would be, oftentimes they take credit for a portion of the basic process control system, and then we often, as the last step in that process is we put in a safety instrument of function. Both of those are cyber vulnerable. But there may be something in there like a pressure relief valve or maybe a non-programmable HIBS maybe it's not cyber vulnerable. So when we're looking at preventing these major accident hazards, we should be learning how to design out, to the extent possible, or reducing the risk, the probability of a cyber attack substantially by making sure that we have control barriers that are non-cyber vulnerable in our safety systems. So that would at least take care of the major accident hazard scenarios. And then there's all the other things that are not safety related, just what we call consequential business loss. It's not going to be an explosion or anything, but you trip the unit, so that there's a consequential business loss associated with that. So that's we have our basic hygiene and the other things we're talking about, leveraging additional tooling that we can bring to bear on that. But I just wanted to make a point that from a safety system design point of view, we need to start incorporating techniques and making sure we're looking at our control barriers. Are they cyber vulnerable? If they all are, what are we going to do about it?
But relative to his specific question, with what you just said, just to follow up.
Yeah.
There are the standards organizations for his industry in particular, ISA and things, those groups, the safety systems groups, safety standards and cyber standards are starting to work together, specifically for that kind of thing. Now, I don't know that anybody's sharing events or not. I'll let somebody.
Yeah, we're not doing that. We're not
There's
sharing
a big
information
difference
across
between
companies.
DoD
Yeah.
and companies, right? Though, Mark,
Yeah, I think we need to start sharing events.
Yeah.
I mean, you asked, I think, are we doing that in the industry? I think you can look at very specific places where we are. Nuclear is here. I think I see a couple people from nuclear here that I recognize. I see Nathan and see some others out there. They lead the way in terms of sharing. They learned it back at 3 Mile Island that sharing can improve safety significantly. And what I see in our industry in electric utilities is that we're trying to learn from that really good example and expand it down from preventing a radiological event, which is the primary goal in the nuclear industry, to, how am I going to prevent other sorts of things from occurring? And I think information sharing and actually working together to solve those problems is where we're going to get some of those advantages. I'm seeing it happen. I'm getting more and more excited that it is, but it's small steps forward. There's still a lot of times when we don't want to share because I'm embarrassed about something, or I share but I didn't give enough pertinent detail to actually make it actionable for somebody else. We've got to get over that, and somebody's got to be the first one to break the dilemma and start saying, I'm going to open up the kimono and start sharing because this is going to help somebody else be better. If I got some sort of problem or some consequence that occurred, I got to get over it, swallow my pride, and share it so that they don't have the same problem. And it's going to start with whoever's first.
isn't,
So the ISACs are good. So in our industry, there's a little, there's an elephant in the room when the government's here, and I apologize if CISA or ISAC is there. I really like them. In ours, it's tough to get a lot of sharing with EISAC because we're the same place where the FAA used to be, right? It used to be the airlines for their near-miss program reported to their ISAC, which was their regulator, the FAA. There wasn't a lot, well, I guess initially they reported a lot, and then they started getting fines, and then they reported a little. And then they moved over the reporting to NASA, and then they started reporting more. And the safety incidents started to go down dramatically, right? Because they made a barrier there, they separated it by putting that stuff out. So we've got to get it to a point where there's no financial loss or that sort of regulatory loss for reporting that incident. It needs to be something that the lawyers need to consider as a duty to report, I think. That when something happens, it's a duty to share that, to start making, I think that's what it is in nuclear. And to answer your question, yeah, I think I think anybody in the nuclear, if you've met with them and understand it, if they identify something and they don't share, they would consider that that they didn't do their job correctly.
Well, there's one other comment. I mean, one thing is, and I don't know what stuff is shared with the ISACs, but there's also these other programs, I would say, that more on the threat intelligence side, just saying, I had this problem, I had that problem. You know, I don't want to mention companies, but Dragos is a big proponent of that. And I give Rob Lee a lot of credit for that, trying to say, neighborhood keeper, is that the name of the thing?
That's the one. Yeah.
You know, but it's really to try to get everybody to report stuff to each other so that they can all benefit from it. That's the argument for it, at least. I don't know if that's actually happening, and I don't know even what's reported. I mean, if one thing is to report, I had this compromise,
Right.
which then you know that somebody's trying to use that type of an attack and stuff like that. But I don't know that what else it encompasses from the point of view of reporting things. I mean,
Well, it helps give context, I think.
but it is just events, it's just compromises?
No, the
attacks?
goal is going to be able to query the system to look for very specific analytics. So the eventual goal of that system would be, if I have something in my environment, it would get picked up in the neighborhood, and if Exelon is in the neighborhood as well, and right now there's Southern Company and Ameren and others, if they're in that neighborhood and they see something, right now, the fastest method we have is if I have Nathan, I'll use your example, sorry, but if I have Nathan in my address book, I can pick up my phone and call him and say, hey, are you guys seeing something? And then he's going to have to go over someone else, and there's a delay associated with that information sharing, right? And it's only if I happen to know somebody there. But if it occurred at a different place and I don't have a contact, I'm not going to know. So it's a very informal system. I could put it out to the ISACs. It's great. I love the idea. I think we're going to need to do it, but the information going out is so redacted that it's useless in many respects. I was sitting next to another utility once that looked at their report and they didn't know if it was their report or not. They said, I think that one's mine, but I don't know for sure because it had been so watered down. We need to get that information so that other people can actually deal with it. So the Neighborhood Keeper program is basically, if I see something and I have a question, is anybody else seeing this? I could build a query and write it, and it would run against Southern Company and Ameren and anybody else, the co-ops, anybody who's in that neighborhood, and I would get back an answer, and I wouldn't see who or where, because it's not relevant, really. It's more that I see a hash of a file, for example. I've uploaded it to Adalis or any of the other systems that I might use to verify it, but I want to know, is anybody else running that file? I can put out a query in the neighborhood, and it would give me back an answer, and it'd say no, and I'd be, wait a second, I know that they have the same control system as me, but they're not seeing the file, this must be malicious. So it helps you give that level of context to something very quickly.
And I guess,
Just to add to that too, the way that I see it in like a platonic vision, like nirvana, would be if you were able all to, collaborate and have some sort of artificial intelligence system that was able to look at what was the latest thing, what was the latest attack, and then automatically did that all for you. Not
Right.
the person behind the scenes trying to do it. So in my opinion, you need systems that are collaborative from company to company, not just within their own company.
And I love that you're from Georgia Tech, because I have a slide with Georgia Tech in it tomorrow that would kind of describe that. I actually had some context. But yeah, agreed. We've got to get faster, and we've got to increase that speed to sharing and responding.
and in a way, that is really proactive kind of defense, right? I mean, you might see something, and that's either telling you, hey, other people are seeing that, so I should look out for it. Or maybe somebody maybe it's a compromise, and you say, I'm sad to hear you got that. Maybe you are, maybe you aren't, but thanks for telling me, because I'm going to do something to watch out for that.
We already do that in Neighborhood Watch. Our neighborhoods have a program where if somebody's house gets, my neighbor's house years ago got broken into.
Yeah, I mean, that's the analogy I
right?
like.
So in the Facebook level posting was, oh no, everything got broken into, and there was all kinds of, we didn't know what to do, and people hand waving, flapping, running around doing nothing. And then we met with the police the next morning, and they described the specific details that they knew. They'd already figured out it was a white truck. They'd already figured out that they went around the back of the house and cut the glass, reached inside, opened the door, and then the door sensor tripped and silenced the alarm, and the people ran away. So now immediately everybody in the neighborhood with an alarm knows they're covered from that attack, right? And every gardener with a white truck got accosted for the next 3 months, right? Somebody was coming in. That's the level, that's the analogy of what we need in cybersecurity. If something occurs and I know it's there, it's actionable intelligence that somebody else can actually respond with to take an action that's going to matter.
But again, and I'm just trying to separate that from the thing of, one thing is with a lot of the detection technology today, where you see something funny happening, that, I like that because it gives you a chance to react to it, rather than sit there and let the person doing it, whoever's doing it, do it. In a way, the neighborhood keeper, or whatever the program may be called, is giving you a chance to even get ahead of that by saying, I'm going to even look out for that, or I'm going to, I'm going to change something in my security, to address that one thing. It's kind of things like, with threat intelligence, or you better put this profile, you better block this IP address, or whatever, that you can chase your tail with, that kind of stuff. But conceptually, and that's kind of being proactive, it's proactively strengthening your defenses in those areas where something seems to be happening.
Right.
Then another thing is reacting to it afterwards. I think you need good support for both. But
Right.
I'm sorry, yes.
Ultimately, one of the reasons why I like a lot of team question earlier is we get this type of conversation dialogue going, right? So for regulated industries like NERC is really saying that you need to certify your suppliers for physical and for cyber supply chain issues, right? And so the question in my mind is, so there, on the IP side, there's what's called the Cyber Code Alliance, which is about 250 different vendors that come together where we're sharing information, threat information today. The question in my mind is, do we think that we need this type of alliance on the OT side to be able to share threat information? Because what you just talked about was regulated environments, not non-regulated environments, right? You have to have representation on both sides. And what you described earlier was similar to what a virus told us from the perspective of a virus. We need to expand that concept and start to formalize it between all industry groups to be able to have us react on it as an overall industry.
Yeah, well, let me just comment on that, because I'm not directly involved in, I work occasionally with our cyber defense team, but we're just sort of getting our training wheels going of integrating our OT environment with our IT cyber defense. We're not going to stand up a OT cyber defense team. We're going to have one cyber defense team, and we're going to integrate OT into that. And I know that they're already using, these threat intelligence tools from a few different vendors. So that may be going on. I'm speculating to a certain degree, but that sharing at that level may already be going on in the Shell case.
Yeah, let me
We
just
have
add a
another
couple.
question here.
Yeah, my question is in terms of cybersecurity vulnerability, where do you consider our greater risk? If there is a greater risk, is it on the technology side or is it on the personnel side?
The greatest risk of what, though?
Greatest risk of getting hacked.
Well, I think it's the people side. I mean, I think we probably can't overemphasize, awareness training, right? I think, Patel, you might have mentioned, somebody mentioned they're training their vendors, their suppliers, their own staff, et cetera, et cetera. So we have versions of that as well. And so I do think that the biggest risk is not the technology, but the personnel.
I would say combination. So the initial access victor, I mean, we've heard in a couple talks that phishing is the biggest one. That's we call it a people problem now. If we're going to solve it, we could solve it tomorrow by getting rid of email, right? If we just stopped using a protocol that allowed anonymous sending bought and paid for by the receiver instead of the sender, we wouldn't have phishing as it is today. There would have to be account takeovers before you could anonymously get somebody. So there are technical things that we could solve that, but right now, as the system is built, it's people. Once that adversary is in the network, then there's a technology problem. And back to Michelle's presentation, if we've properly segmented the network and that sort of thing, it's technical. So it's not a adversary has to be right one time sort of thing. It's they've got to get the person, and then they've got to, all the threats that we're seeing, it's people, then technology. They've got to get both of them. So we're failing at both sides of that right now.
Ricky, did you have a question? I did. Larry, can you give him the mic? Yeah. He's very polite. He sits there and
He gave up.
waved his hand one
I was
time
going to
and then he
bring my
gave
mic
up.
down there.
So, Mark, this is a question for you. So you mentioned a couple of times you're starting the journey with anomaly and breach detection. Can you speak to some of the quick wins or early wins that you've identified with having that capability in the portfolio? And also, if you can speak to some of the resourcing that's made it successful or a challenge that you had to employ to make sure that you can make sense of all this new data that's being thrown at you.
Yeah, so I think we're pretty early in this, so I wouldn't say we've had a quick win per se, but we have a strategy that we have developed to sort of implement this technology, and we recognize that, you know, at the assets, you know, we don't have enough, but we do have resources at assets that are involved in, you know, this IT/OT, you know, this ICS security space. Now, those folks are busy. In most cases, those folks are busy doing all that basic hygiene, running around making sure backups are going and, you know, patching is going, et cetera, et cetera. So they don't really have time to deal with, you know, these kind of tooling where there's all this data coming at you. We expect the rollout of such tools would be integrated into the asset, but then it's going to roll up to something like a central function that would then be able to do, you know, bring to bear the automated tooling on this. You know, the tools themselves do a lot of that, right? Now, will we provide a view locally? Yeah, so those resources locally at the site will probably have a view of the tool and will be able to see into their own environment what's going on. But I think they're going to be getting a lot of help, you know, from our cyber defense team, you know, is what we're planning, is how we're planning to do that. So we want to bring, you know, event logs, you know, and also the network, you know, analysis functions, you know, into a central function to help, you know, all the assets across the shell landscape. I don't know if that answers your question.
Could I ask?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, just to add one thing to that, there was a talk at S4 that somebody gave. I was looking up her name. I was moving to a different thing, but heard the first few words of her talk. It'll be worth listening to, I think, when Dale puts it on YouTube. Her first few words were essentially, she was in the SOC and somebody else, a different team, went out and got her this new anomaly detection that was going to solve all the security problems, and she sat down and her life became a living, terrible situation. I don't remember her exact phrase, but it was so many events, and nobody had planned for the people and the resources to tune each of those events down. Anomaly detection, I think, has a very good use situation or a use case for detecting anomalies in a turbine or a process, a belt that's having problems and things like that. When people are involved, if there's OSI software, they have an anomaly detection engine that we looked at, and they don't use it for threat. They use it more for tuning devices and things like that. And I think they say right up front, you're going to have an 80-something% false positive rate. Just plan on it. And you know, when people are involved, we don't do things. We all think we come in every morning and we get something to drink and we start reading our email or something like that. But as soon as something else happens in your day, things go different. And at our control systems, it's always something different. There's not a same day, any day.
Something Ricky and I were talking about earlier, but relative, because I want to know what Sal's doing, maybe what you're doing. For the anomaly detection, we've talked about that here for many years. And I've always been a proponent, you know, not a proponent, but a big issue is it detects all kinds of things, which I think is good, that it can detect process problems and things like that. But somebody has to triage. You know, if you send them all to the cybersecurity team, they won't understand half the stuff that's going on there. You know, particularly whenever it's something in the plant and Joe went out and changed something and everybody knew Joe went out and changed stuff. They have no idea. They spend forever trying to figure that out, communicating. On the other hand, if you just go and ask the plant people, you get the alerts. They've already got more than enough alerts. I don't know which is better. I just wanted to get your view of that, because I think a lot of times I've heard and seen most of the anomalies that are detected are anomalies in equipment behavior, maybe the process changes, somebody changes, you know, somebody will download something that's not normal, but it's okay because somebody knows that they're doing it, that kind of stuff. So a lot of them are local issues that could be resolved locally.
Yeah, well, let me just quickly
So,
address,
yeah, which way?
let me just quickly address that. you have to build, at least in some of these tools, you have to build use cases. And so that is a collaboration between folks at the asset that understand what can go wrong, and then they work with a team within the cyber defense team, and they build the use case into the tool. So there is this, and it's going to be a long journey, because lots of assets, I'm sure there's going to be lots of use cases that we want to be alert on. So there's this collaboration going on to build up our knowledge around these use cases that make these tools work. Right.
Well, just to comment, it's a couple of questions back, but talking about sharing information, at Evonik we participate in several different working groups. Globally, in Europe, we participate in AMUR, and in the Americas, we have a process automation user group, and we have a collaboration between those two to share some of that information. So we're starting that communication path and sharing with that group. And also, we participate with the American Industry Council and kind of pulling not just their IT people, but their OT people to the table for that sharing. The cyber PHA, that's something we're in the process of development. And as far as the DHS and the CISA, that's kind of an untapped or not well utilized resource. There's a lot more there that we're not taking advantage of.
By Evonik, or you think
by anyone? I don't see anybody, totally tapping into that. So.
All right, well, we've already exhausted our time, but again, I want to remind you, we're going to have these roundtables. We're going to go out now and take a break, and then we're going to change the seating around and make tables. There'll be square tables, not round tables. But can you all stay? Can you all participate at the table? I wanted to give people a chance to continue these kind of discussions, as well as, if you have a table, you aren't necessarily the targets. I mean, it's a discussion, so other people can say, what am I doing? That kind of, which will help you guys. So we're going to set it up, and what we're going to do is start with tables, based on the topics that we had workshops in today. And we'll see if that meets the questions that we have been asked. I mean, one of them was general, but I don't know who's going to get there. So we'll have to see. We haven't done this before. We're kind of winging it. I think it has a lot of potential and value for you, and we're trying to give you more chance to interact. So anyhow, come afterwards. So if you all come back, it starts at 4. Okay. Yeah, very good, guys. Thank you very much.